Juan Mendez Scott's Hologram. Chapter 6. Pour another drink. The house Roxie purchased for her family on Swan Creek Road sat on the waters of Swan Creek. Mr. Rosario stood at the grill cooking and moving to the rap of Jay-Z from speakers in the backyard. While me, Roxie, Estella, Mrs. Rosario, and Ricardo sat at the patio table eating hamburgers and half-smokes, watching boats sail up and down Swan Creek with people laughing and shouting, having an enjoyable time. One boat was playing rap music while the other played classic rock. The Rosario women sipped on strawberry wine coolers and me and the Rosario men sipped on Heineken. Now and then Mrs. Rosario snuck sips from her glass of vodka and cranberry juice, getting stupid drunk. I noticed the Rosarios peeping over at the mountain of food on my plate, and how I scuffed the food down like the lion I was. Of course, I didn't give a damn. Take a fucking picture, it'll last longer. Without turning away from my plate, I said, I notice you all looking at me. Then I gave the Rosarios a stupid grin. Now tipsy, Mrs. Rosario said, how can we not? The way you attacked that plate. There was laughter from Mrs. Rosario and Ricardo, and of course I didn't care, so I just shrugged, wiping grease from my mouth with a napkin. I peeped up at Roxie and Estella and I could tell I had embarrassed them. Oh, well. Ain't no shame in my game, as they say. I like to eat. Mrs. Rosario stared at me, frowning. She was a small, athletically built black woman with dark gray eyes and bushy eyebrows, in her mid-40s, I would say. Sounds like feeding time at the zoo over there, she said, pushing her long layered hair back over her shoulder. This time there was laugh-out-loud laughter, with Mr. Rosario leading the way. I gave Mrs. Rosario a dry look. I don't believe in wasting tasty food, Mrs. Rosario. Especially at a cookout. My dad's cooking more food, Roxie said, embarrassed. You don't have to eat like that. Now it was time to put Roxie's little ass in her place, right in front of Mommy and Daddy. Roxie, I will eat like I want to eat, okay? You can be embarrassed all you want. I'm not. Roxie shrugged and waved me off. I can pull out another box of steaks, Todd, if you want, Mr. Rosario said, pulling another Heineken from the cooler. Mr. Rosario, who was Afro-Latino, was a cool, laid-back, easygoing guy. He always had a welcoming attitude with a warm, welcoming smile to match. Unlike his witch of a wife. He was a thin guy in his late 40s with a delicate build, pale complexion, curly hair with a thick beard. I said, no, Mr. Rosario, I'm quite done here, sir. Thank you. Delicious meal, sir, thank you. Mr. Rosario nodded, gulping down his beer, wiping his sweaty forehead with his forearm. Ricardo looked up and looked around. Hey, Doug's still coming? At 19, Ricardo was the youngest of the Rosario kids. He was so skinny you could use him to pick a lock. He had jet black curly hair tied in a ponytail. He was a silly kid with big teeth, and he laughed at anything and everything. Roxie and Estella became uncomfortable when Ricardo asked about Douglas Peck. And I gave Ricardo a funny look for it, too. I think he's still coming, Mrs. Rosario said, sipping vodka. Not taking my eyes off my plate, I said, Doug? What is he doing coming over here? Now it was Mrs. Rosario giving me a funny look. She said, Douglas has been a part of this family since he was a preteen, always will be. Me and Estella exchanged slick looks as I put the finishing touches on my paper plate of food. She and I both knew that her mother was behind this, trying to get Roxie and Doug back together. Which would not happen because I was going to make sure that it didn't. Mrs. Rosario looked across the table at my plate full of chicken bones, fish bones, rib bones, and steak bones, and her eyes grew. Good Lord, what? You had a massacre on that plate? Ricardo and Mr. Rosario cracked up laughing at me and, of course, I didn't give a damn. I just got up and threw my paper plate of bones into the trash can. Roxie, still embarrassed, gave her mother a look. Ma. I reached into the cooler and grabbed myself a beer. I'm going to go chill in the basement for a minute. Let this food digest. Roxie nodded. Okay. I headed for the basement door with a proud grin stretched across my face. Although I may come back for seconds, though. Help yourself, Todd, Mr. Rosario said. It'll be more food out here. I thought the plate you just dumped in the trash was seconds, Mrs. Rosario said. Don't you mean thirds and fourths? They laughed, and I paid their sorry asses no attention, going into the basement. Ma, I heard Roxie say, don't embarrass him like that, come on. I peeped back and saw Mrs. Rosario raising her glass, toasting to me. Oh, I'm just joking with you, Todd. You help yourself, baby. The sarcasm in her voice was as sour as she was. I took a big swig of beer, sat it on the coffee table, and laid across the couch on my back. And I listened to the conversation with my eyes closed. I didn't know Doug was coming, I heard Roxie say. Who invited him? Mrs. Rosario said, me, who else? Estella said, wouldn't that be, I don't know, a little awkward? I wish you and Doug could work things out, Mrs. Rosario said. That witch tried to lower her voice, but I still heard her. Roxie said, Ma, come on. I just don't trust Todd sometimes, Mrs. Rosario said. Mrs. Rosario was right. I couldn't be trusted. Especially when it came to money. So, with that said, I didn't give a shit what Mrs. Rosario thought of me. Roxie tried her best to shut her mother up. Mama, come on. I don't, Mrs. Rosario said. I'm about to bring some more food out. What do you want me to bring out? Mr. Rosario said, let's see. Bring a pack of turkey burgers out. Thank you, hun. I heard Mrs. Rosario go into the house. I seriously thought about going upstairs and approaching her in the kitchen for trying to get Roxie and Doug back together. Estella said, now why would Ma invite Doug when she knew Todd was going to be here? Stella, I don't know, Roxie said. Doug is like family to us, Mr. Rosario said. I heard Mrs. Rosario come back out of the house with the turkey burgers. Well, hello there, stranger, she said, with a taste of joy in her voice. I recognized my ex-business partner and friend's voice right away. Hey, everybody, Douglas Peck said. Even Ricardo was glad to see him. My boy Doug, what's up? I listened to everybody react to seeing Doug with hugs and kisses. They were kissing his ass, and it made me mad and jealous. I suddenly wanted to kill Mrs. Rosario as well. You better get yourself a plate and get yourself something to eat before all the food is gone, Mrs. Rosario said. I heard laughter, of course. I knew Mrs. Rosario was talking about me and my massive appetite. It made me want to kill her more. No, Mr. Rosario said, we have plenty of food, Douglas. Take your time. Sounds good, Mr. Rosario, Doug said. I'm going to go wash my hands right quick. Let me get some more food, Mrs. Rosario said, her drunken slur beyond repair. Some half smokes. Estella said, you sure you haven't had enough to drink, Ma? Girl, please, Mrs. Rosario said, which meant she was going to drink until she passed out in front of everybody. I heard Mrs. Rosario go back into the house for more food. I got up and eased over to the basement patio door to listen and, of course, see how Roxie was going to react to seeing Doug. I watched Roxie walk Doug to the basement patio door. How they stared into each other's eyes with love, missing each other. And it made me jealous. Made me want to kick Doug's ass in front of everybody. Roxie said, so how you been? Doug stared into Roxie's eyes, so in love he looked like someone drugged him up with love. Missing you, he said. Missing my wife. Roxie's head dropped, guilt flattening her. I may have made a mistake. Doug looked puzzled. What mistake? Asking you for a divorce, Roxie said. Now Doug dropped his head, nodding. I was wrong. You were just trying to protect me. Like a husband should protect his wife. And I was being hard-headed, not listening. I'm always going to protect you, Roxie. Married or not. That was the promise I made to your parents. And I'm going to keep that promise. I'm afraid not, Doug. Too late. It's nothing you can do. I just want to apologize, Roxie said. Doug said, babe, you don't have to apologize. Marriages have challenges. They stared into each other's eyes, so in love, I thought they were going to kiss. Roxie said, I've just been thinking about, well, I don't know. Maybe we can sit down one day and just talk. The hope of getting back with Roxie seduced Doug so badly, I thought I saw tears in his eyes. Talk about making it work? Yeah, Roxie said. We can talk about that. Doug became curious. What's going on with Todd? Todd and I are not getting along too well right now. We're just not on the same page. Roxie, I tried to warn you. He's greedy, he's all about himself. He's a narcissist. He's no good. I worry about you all the time. Regret blasted Roxie right in the face. She was suddenly worried about her future. But we'll talk, Doug said, softly squeezing her hand. Okay, Roxie said. Oh. Todd is in there. He's in the basement. Doug frowned like I was a scumbag. I rushed into the bedroom they labeled the guest room, leaving the door cracked to watch Doug. When he walked in, he peeped around for me, looking disgusted. When he couldn't find me, he went into the bathroom to wash his hands. When he closed the door, I left out the house to the backyard. Mrs. Rosario poured another drink, looking like a drunk slob. And I didn't like the nasty way she was staring at me. Ready for your thirds and fourths, Todd? I ignored her, ready to leave. I had work to do. Work that involved murder. Doug is here, Todd, Estella said. You see him? Yeah, I said, looking at the time on my Rolex. I just got a call from my mother. I'm going to run over there real quick to see what's going on with her. Is she okay? Roxie asked me, concerned. Mom is fine, I said. I gave Roxie a look, then I kissed her. See you later at the house. Bye. I headed around the house toward my Range Rover. With my back turned, I heard Mrs. Rosario say, You sure you don't want to take a plate with you, Todd? I know you do. When I peeped back at them, Ricardo and Mr. Rosario were laughing. Roxie rushed into the house to be with Doug. And my lover Estella got mad at her mother. Ma, that's enough, Estella said. You probably hurt Todd's feelings. Mrs. Rosario said, Hell, the only thing hurting Todd right now is his stomach.